Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Welcome back, everybody. We have a great guest today, so I'm just going to get right into it. I'm joined today by Lee Tsukroff. Lee's the CFO of Thorne. Thorne is where health and nutrition intersect. The company empowers individuals to live healthier lives and longer lives through personalized, science-backed health and wellness solutions for optimal performance. What could be more important than that? Lee, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Yeah, Jack, thanks for having me.
No, glad to do it. And I usually butcher company descriptions, although as a user of your company, I don't think I was too bad. But maybe you can fill in a few of the details that I left out, given my tendency to oversimplify things.
No, that's great, and I'm sure my chief growth officer and brand officer would welcome me rather than you to have the opportunity to talk about where we're at. And Thorne is a company that's been around for 40 years. Many people don't look at Thorne as a company that has been there. We are a practitioner led business. So back in the day, we started with naturopathic doctors, and supplementation back in 1985 was not what it is today. It's gone quite a long way. But what Thorne has done is we've kept the scientific, the clinical, and the efficacy of the product really where it started. So we are highly recommended by practitioners. And that really serves as a catalyst once we started getting into our direct to consumer business and widening the net. So within Thorne, we want to make sure we're using the highest ingredients, the best quality, clinical backed, scientific backed, in order to give the consumer the best experience when they enter supplementation. And we feel that Thorne has that differentiation in the market, having the best of who we were and who we are now and who we're going to continue to be.
No, it's a fascinating company, and I'm definitely looking forward to exploring it. But before we get into that, I'd like to chat a little about your own personal background. So where'd you grow up, Lee?
Yeah, I was a kid from Bronx, New York. The family was all from New York, and they can talk about all the back in the day with my my pop being a Yankee fan, seeing Polo Grounds, and then I from there I moved to northern New Jersey. So if I look at and people say, where are you from? Typically I'll say I'm a Northeast New Jersey guy, and then I might get, depending on who's looking across, some scowls of, okay, you're one of those guys. And I would say to all people in the state, New Jersey is a great state to do a few things. So you had grown up in really northern Jersey. It was my first stop along the way.
Now, it's funny, all you folks from the Bronx can't help but mention the Yankees in a conversation. I'm from Boston, right? So
yeah,
well, a lot of suffering at the hands of the Yankees in my childhood. So
yes, and this weekend we'll see. I actually, for who I root for, we won't get too deep in. I'm the other New York team, which is a different story, maybe a different podcast. If you invite me back, I can tell you a little bit more about that.
Okay, well, I look forward to that because 1986 still hurts all these years later. So cool. But anyway, tell me a little about you. When you grew up, you went to college, and what did you study?
Yeah, I studied at University of Maryland. So where I was at in northern Jersey, I came from a family was middle class, and I think if I look back at times, I would say maybe at times it was lower middle. Certainly wasn't towards the upper, hardworking family. My father was a credit manager in a family furniture business, wasn't our business. So he always talked about the things that he did. It was less about credit, but the stories he came back with. He worked in a town in northern Jersey called Patterson. So when I went to school at Maryland, was looking at studying finance and really getting into a career, which I thought, which we'll get into, a Wall Street career, but, made the move from where I was down to, the Balt Wash area.
Your father worked in a furniture store in Patterson, New Jersey?
Correct.
It's interesting. I don't know. You ever heard the Harry Houdini thing?
In
Harry Houdini died mysteriously, and there was a conspiracy kind of the vein that Elvis Presley was alive. And apparently, there was a furniture salesman in Paterson, New Jersey, who bore an uncanny resemblance to Houdini. And people were convinced that it was that Harry Houdini faked his death and worked at a furniture store in Paterson, New Jersey. So,
that one, so my father is still with us. So this evening I'll have to ask him that, Jack.
yeah, ask if you've heard that story. 'Cause I remember hearing that story like when I was a teenager, and the listeners are probably going to think I'm a real weirdo, so we may end up cutting this part out. I don't know, but yeah, I'd heard that. For apparently there were people in the area who genuinely believed that Harry Houdini was selling furniture, and it could well have been in your dad's company. Who knows? So. Cool. Anyway, that's a nice little detour. So, when you were a kid, what was your first job?
So my first job was a busboy at the local Red Lobster in the town I grew up in, and I was looking for shift after shift after shift to put more money in my pocket to put away to buy my first car and have some fun outside. And as a busboy in early high school, what was great about it is that there was plenty of food in the back if you got in with some of the kitchen staff. So I was never short of eating decently, and great first experience. And I would add too, because I wanted to put as much money in my pocket at the time as possible. One of my managers actually asked me if I wanted to paint the outside of the Red Lobster, and what business do I have painting the outside of the Red Lobster? And he came with cans of paint, a ladder, and brushes, and I clearly oversold what I thought I can do, and it took me many days to go do that. So that was my first experience. Not only bussing, but ended up painting the outside of a Red Lobster.
How about that? That's so cool. But it's the confidence, right? That thing serves you well in your professional life, even though you had no qualifications, you just went and did it. So good for you. So you mentioned your first car. So what was that?
So my first car was a 1969 Camaro, and very very cool car. We my father had picked up a old one really on the cheap. Then we bought a parts car. I took my time and walked in quite a few junkyards, learned a lot about cars. And my father was an Army mechanic back in the day, so I learned quite a bit about it, and really fun bonding with family, and also learning things that I never knew about. And I think I'll talk about that in my financial career. It's about getting into things and not having to muster up courage to do things maybe that you're not as comfortable with.
That's great. So I want to talk a little about your career, because you've had a really a fantastic career progression. But one of your early, more senior roles was with Melissa and Doug. And maybe you can tell us a little about, what that was like, maybe some of the mentors you had there who made an impact on your career.
Yeah, so Melissa and Doug, what I'll do, Jack, is take maybe a step before them, because Melissa and Doug was right before I came into Thorne, which is, important. So a bulk of my career, if I look at, has been in consumer goods. When I got out of undergrad, I was, looking at banking, and had a short stint with Bear Stearns, in the banking day, and then moved from, Bear to Nabisco a bit, and got into consumer goods, which was really neat. I had an opportunity to get out into real life factories and see how things were being made. And, I was the son, compared to my other, siblings, that brought home Oreos and crackers. And, so everybody loved, they didn't really care what I did as long as I came home with boxes of food. And, I got into a lot of cash flow forecasting at that point, and then moved my way into Unilever over a long career. And if I think about mentors and things that I've done, and people, I separate it into a couple different blocks: the things that I've done, and then the people I've done them with, and who was influential, if that's okay, Jack. And so if I look at the things that I've done, spent a lot of time in finance. So as a early finance professional, have done the things: cost accounting, financial planning and reporting, cash flow, budgeting. Took a stint in treasury to learn a little bit more about how things are working in big corporate. Got involved in acquisitions, not being the one to look at bringing the company in, but to do the due diligence on it quite a bit, which really helped in broadening my understanding of business overall, and did a bit of supply chain as well. And one of the guys that I would say was really influential in my career was a gentleman named Mike Polk. Mike was the CEO of the the business in the Americas, so North and Latin America. And Mike was a guy who, not a finance guy, but recognized the importance of finance and really taught me and guided to be a financial professional second, be a business professional first. And that was a big part of where I took a lot of insight from that and that experience to really guide to be the best you can at an enterprise leader before getting into your technical or your functional areas.
Interesting. So that mentor you mentioned, where was that? Was that at Unilever?
Yeah, that was at Unilever. So Mike came in, he was a craft guy. He came in as a senior level within the Unilever business. And at that time, Jack, we were consolidating quite a lot of businesses, and they were bringing a lot of companies together. And then Mike ultimately got the big job running the whole North American business, and then the Americas business in North and Latin America. And so that's where he and I first connected, and then I'll talk about a connection to him a little bit later as my career went.
Cool. Yeah, and I want to, Unilever, if I have my facts right, that was your first ever CFO job. So
Yeah.
Every CFO has the first ever CFO job, but tell me a little about that learning experience. What are the did you feel you were well prepared for it? The big surprises along the way?
Yeah, it's I appreciate that question, and what I'll say to people sometime is that you don't know you're in the right role if you don't have a nervous pit in your stomach, if you will. So when you're asked to take on a role that's a little bit bigger than what you've done before, a little bit of uncertainty, although each one of the pieces you need to do, the magic comes together that I see it about how do you tie in all the experiences you've had, to become that CFO and that leader, not just being good at what goes on in the factory or budgeting or planning. And so I was CFO of our North American ice cream business. So we had brands like Ben and Jerry's in that business, Klondike, Breyers, if you're from the Northeast. And so that was a amazing opportunity, to get in with a business that needed a bit of fixing, and working with some, really great people that, I'm still close with along the way. Came in as CFO, partnered up with a few different people. And similar to my comment on Nabisco about, Oreos and cookies and crackers, when I went to, bring your father to school day, just give a little antidote with my kids, coming in there with tie-dyed Ben and Jerry shirts and ice cream, I would say overruled the firemen in the building or the policemen or anyone else. So it was a really cool opportunity at the time.
I can imagine. How many children do you have, Lee?
I have two boys that are both in the city doing their own thing right now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, coming with Ben and Jerry's ice cream would make you very popular on Bring Your Father to School Day. So
yeah, I'm not sure it helped them out in school, but it was neat while I was there.
And I just have to compliment you because in this conversation you've listed about 7 foods that one might describe as junk food, but people listening on the podcast can't tell. But Lee is in extremely good shape, so obviously that's not part of how your daily eating habits are.
No, they, things in, one of the things I say, if you we're going to meet people around, things in motion stay in motion. And I think I think about business as well, Jack, with that is, how do you take momentum and just continue to drive with it regardless of what business you're in, but appreciate that.
Sure, no problem. So I want to check. So before we get into the current role a little more, I'd like to chat a little about leadership lessons along the way. You've worked, Melissa and Unilever, 2 great brands, and you've just worked with some great companies along the way. And so, what did you learn from a leadership perspective that's helping you excel in the current role?
Yeah, the question hits at the heart of what do I believe in and maybe some of my values, and I would start with authenticity. One of the things I do when I come into new teams, I take a visual, and I put a bunch of like animated, pictures there, cartoons around, places I live, teams I like, my, wife, pictures, of, and two boys. And I also have in there on the bottom right, I have a word that's authentic. Then I have transparent and I have open doors. So when I think about leadership lessons, those are the three that maybe are foundational because I don't believe without having those as a leader that anything I say next will really, come out. So when I think about leadership lessons, be the expert that you need to be in the technical area that you're in. But listen to ideas, listen to thoughts. Don't go in with a preconceived notion that the things that maybe somebody else is telling you, genuinely, and it sounds a little cliche, but it's almost the listen twice, talk once type of concept that I would bring in, and also the other leadership I would say is be prepared to say yes, right? So in CFOs, a lot of CFOs, might have a mystique of when they're talking with investment, the CFO may not want to go do something. I want to be a giver of spend, a giver of opportunity, a giver of ROI. So when I think as a leader is always looking past the question that somebody's asking you or past the topic, it's about 2 steps, 3 steps forward. And I think those are some of the things that I think about as I lead, the teams that I lead.
That's fantastic. So now you're at Thorne, and I'd love to understand a little about, although it's probably pretty obvious, but how that opportunity come about? What about it was appealing to you?
Yeah. So when I maybe take a step back, Jack, when I left Unilever and I worked for Newell Brands for a couple years with Mike Polk, the mentor I mentioned, was CEO down there. So worked with him a little bit. And what I found out down there, it was big CPG, wasn't at the level of Unilever at a $50 billion company. It was about 6 billion, different channels, different products, different customers. But the playbook was a lot of the same that I've done beforehand, and had an opportunity to join, Melissa and Doug, and at the time it was about 300 million privately held business, and working with the founders, and got into this business that was a purpose-driven business about real play, screen-free. And what it really, at that point, I had full operational ownership and full financial ownership of that business. Did that for, a couple of years. We sold that business to a second investor who, wanted me to stay on. And during that tenure, what I learned was you can have a purpose-driven business and still, make money and drive and move forward. And I knew that from, my prior days, but it was really left let's call it a remnant with me that I wanted to take to, my next opportunity. And in Q4 of 2023, we had agreed to sell the business. So I knew I wasn't going to want to stay on with, the big corporate who bought us, and had an opportunity to learn about Thorne. Met with L. Catterton's our current investor, met with my now business partner and boss and CEO, Colin Watts, and was looking for an opportunity to get into a brand that can do well with people, whether it's helping kids to grow and develop. And in our category, I touched on a little bit earlier, in consumer wellness, it's about helping people stay healthy longer, about wellness. It's about healthy aging and performance. And if I think about those three together, along with, what we're trying to do in the business, it was really exciting to have the opportunity, to come here. And that for me was the first thing outside of, the significant growth opportunity I think this business has. So when I, did get into the market, great opportunity to look at Thorne as a brand, love the brand, love what it did, love the purpose, and it kind of landed me in a great opportunity, once I got on the ground.
Yeah, and I know on the website, the phrase that really caught my attention, you're redefining what it means to live healthier and longer. Doesn't get much better than that, I suppose.
Yeah, and it hits us all in, different levels. If you're a 20-year-old who is, really about going to, the gym every day, or you're a, woman in her 30s doing, Pilates, or 40s, and you're, a professional who's playing pickle at night, no matter where you are, we believe that Thorne can meet you on that journey. So it's really cool to be part of that.
That's great. And I noticed you have the CFO COO role at Thorne. So is the CFO role just not challenging enough for you? Is that it? You're a little bored with just one job?
Yeah, I wish that would be the case, and I appreciate that. When I came in, I did come in as CFO. The company was going through, with the investor, they took the business private. We put in a whole slew of new leadership. The former CEO was, moving on and had an opportunity, given my background, having spent a lot of time around the supply chain. I've worked in supply chain at Unilever. I've been through, not just touring distribution centers and factories, but having, worked in manufacturing facilities, was given the opportunity to take on the COO as well as the CFO, role. And in my CFO role, I currently have IT, working, underneath me as well. And what it, really does is I think about taking those pillars, if you will, that I'm working on, the decision making about how to make things move forward more quickly can almost be done instantaneously. When I'm speaking with my, CEO or other members of my leadership team, what I can bring to the table, really quickly is a holistic perspective. So it's not just about we need this as an ROI, because investing in capability, investing in capacity, investing in, quality, if you're, looking at CFO, they shouldn't be opposed, versus one another. But what I'm able to do is really bring that together, and talk to the business in a really fulsome way, each and every time I'm interacting with anyone.
Yeah, and I'm seeing more and more CFOs take on those operational and strategic roles, and I think that's great because they bring so much to bear to that, that role. But you can't do that unless you can completely trust the finance and accounting team around you. You have to have a world-class team if you yourself want to be operational and take on COO type responsibilities. So I'm curiously, what's your philosophy on building a world-class team?
Yeah, that's right, Jack. And if you look at talent and the importance of having the right talent, the right people in, the chair, and the adage of the triangle about people, process enabled by great technology, I think in finance goes a tremendously a long way. So the first thing is, and I think you said it well, is about you can't be trusted and valued outside if you can't get the things that you're getting paid to do well. So building, I call it simple, straightforward, processes in the business that enable the business to understand how do we do business planning, finding, the right people. So I've brought in some really strong talent, around the financial planning, strategic finance, and the controlling function in order to go do that. And coming from in a smaller business, while Thorne was in the public market, there was a lot of things that needed to be changed, need to be fixed, and not a blunt instrument approach to break everything apart, but I think a little bit more surgical to make sure that we can build the right capability. And when I say capability, what I mean there is, having the data available, having the insight available. And in my office, what you would see is, on the board, it goes from, data to information to insight to action. So, one of the things in my role is moving from data to action as quickly as possible, right? There's a lot of great data out there, a lot of great information, but what is it really telling you? And I think in finance, there's the control side of the business that must get done, but it's also about forward-looking insights. And I think that's really important as I built the team, is to make sure that we're always thinking, at forward-looking insights, not just, the control of the business.
Oh, that makes sense. So, one thing you mentioned earlier, your relationship with Colin Watts, the COO of the company, and he's the one who hired you. But my members, the one thing that they ask me probably more than anything else is, how do you build an effective partnership with the CEO? Because I often say CFOs for years have said the most important partnership they have is with the CEO. Rightly so, I suppose. But lately, it's been reciprocated. CEOs didn't necessarily view the CFO as their most important partner until the last few years. But that doesn't just come naturally, and it doesn't just because you have the right title. How do you build a productive strategic relationship?
Yeah, I love that topic, and I love that question, Jack, because that's something that if you look at financial professionals and, as you speak to other, CFOs, a lot of them in their own way will probably say that the function has moved, so far, towards it, the control aspect to the business partner aspect to the strategic, partner. So for me with Colin and having worked with many different CEOs, for me with Colin, the reason why, I came to Thorne, or one of the reasons was, he's got an unbelievable consumer background. He brings to the table, the vision of where, he wanted to take the company, recognizing as a business partner, that sure, he can get in any lane he wants to get into, but he, gives the degrees of freedom. And why we're successful, I feel like we both have radical candor for one another, that there's nothing that, he won't say to me or I won't say to him in a safe environment. I think that he and I are absolutely aligned, with the CEO on where we want to get to. Are there times that how we want to get there might be different? Absolutely. But that's where the candor comes in and the alignment comes in. And, he and I are able to have those conversations. Doesn't mean we need to agree on everything along the way, but the destination and the North Star, we're trying to get to is, certainly, fully the same. And I think that really helps, because if you don't have the destination locked in, you can be zigging and zagging, and that can really breed, frustration. And I think the, trust, and certainly trust is earned, but the trust he has for the function and the trust he has when I come to him is not about, just trying to increase EBITDA for the sake of EBITDA, but I mentioned I want to be, and, some of my team would smile when they hear this. I want to be a giver, as I said earlier, of investment. And, he and I, work together to do that day in, day out.
That sounds good. And, one of the challenges too that CFOs have is making sure that finance and strategy talk to each other, so to speak, that they just don't live in silos, that strategy, takes into account the financial realities, and finance is there to support the strategic execution. Sounds like you probably have a good feel for that. So what tips can you give our listeners on how to make sure those two are blending?
Yeah, the strategy needs to be transformed into action. I do think there needs to be the right metrics and deliverables, for that strategy. So knowing what great looks like in the strategy, and great could be, we're raising awareness from X to Y. Great could mean, our performance marketing is working at a certain level. Great could mean our gross margins are growing up. So taking strategy and breaking it down into tactics, and then those tactics then have metrics attached to it, I think is incredibly important. And the role of the CFO, she or he should be the one that should be doing that. It's great that we want to double the size of the business. It's aspirational, but how do we go do that? How do we break it down into the piece parts? And the way that I operate is always thinking about, mentioned a little bit before, destination, and then plan it back right to left. And if you think like that, a lot of times, you'll figure out that, you're going to need to do something earlier than maybe you thought you were going to have to, and you can anticipate a little bit earlier.
That's great. And so that leads me to a question. I'm curious, you're a non-CPA CFO, which, I was a CFO, CPA when I was a CFO. They both bring different strengths, but I'm imagining that you deal a lot with KPIs, particularly when you're dealing with non-financial types. So what are some of the favorite KPIs you have to, frankly, just help run your business effectively?
Yeah, if you look at a balanced scorecard, is just that. There's, we'll have KPIs around brand, we'll have KPIs around people, and KPIs around the P&L. In consumer goods, the one KPI P&L wise in consumer goods, I think is incredibly important, is gross margin, the fuel for growth. And, companies that if you don't have that KPI as a gross margin, you're not going to be able, to grow. I think in our business, Jack, I look at brand investment, looking and decomposing it in terms of, working, non-working, and what are we doing? Because I think brands that are starved for brand investment, will go the opposite way. And any CFO knows that she or he can, deliver a quarter, deliver a half year, deliver a year by, looking at brands. So I think brand, metrics are incredibly important to look at. one of the key ones is, you mentioned on financials about employee engagement. So how engaged are the employees in the business when we think about, achieving the strategy of the company? And you can be on great leadership teams, you could be with great leaders. And what I've seen is if the organization that you're working with doesn't understand where you want to get to, and they're not as engaged, you won't be able to deliver those results. And underneath that, there is a whole slew of, if I think about SG&A, if I think about time to close, things that promote efficiency within finance. If I look at even record to report, some of these small little metrics that are 2 or 3 clicks underneath are incredibly important to make sure you have the right financial control, if you will, of the business. And of course, if your company has debt, you might look at compliance in a different way. You might look at leverage in a different way. You might look at working capital in a different way. But I would say if it was top 3, it would be about gross margin effectiveness. Are we feeding the brand at the level that we want to feed it? As well as, do we have an engaged employee base to help deliver the strategy?
No, that sounds good. And you're making my next question really easily, because I could lose my license if I don't ask a CFO about generative AI. But it turns out you're actually using it directly with your consumers on their health and wellness journey. And I'd love to understand what that's all about and how your consumers are benefiting. Do you call them consumers or customers? But
consumers. No, I think consumers. So AI, we all know, is overtaking us. It's a tidal wave in a positive way. What we believe in Thorne is about personalization, and personalization doesn't mean that I'm creating a supplement just for Jack, but personalization means if Jack had trouble sleeping and he falls asleep, but he wakes up in the middle of the night, or there's somebody else that has a gut issue, or somebody else is a little bit fatigued. What Thorne is looking to do is meet the consumer where they are, and using our 40-year practitioner heritage, using all the information we have from our science team, using all the clinical information, is creating, I would call it an ecosystem of personalization that we can serve up to our consumers in a way that via AI, that they can interface with that information more cleanly. So it's not about AI replacing the scientific and the clinical base. It's about serving it up via AI in a way that we can answer Jack's question much more quickly and much more matter-of-factly with all the information. So some of the things, and you'll see being rolled out in the next few weeks. We're really excited to be taking some of this on, and we see this as breakthrough within our category, and in the company. Using AI in that respect to meet our business needs incredibly important. And then I would say the other side of it is kind of in the day-to-day that we encourage in the business. How do I get the things done that used to take me this long and compress it to do it even shorter? So the main piece for us is using AI to serve it up, not replacing, at least in our category, the efficacy that we've built up over the history of Thorne.
No, that makes sense. And I want to ask you a little bit, because you're in an industry and work for a company that very competitive, always evolving, always innovating. And, you want to invest in those things to hold your position. On the same hand, Lee, you're a finance person at heart. And I just interviewed another CFO, and I used words like, fiscal, financial discipline. She corrected me, said, no, I'm just cheap. But I don't think she is, despite that. But how do you sort of manage those two things, where you want to grow, you want to invest in the R&D and the innovative products that you need to stay competitive, and yet, you need to do it in a way that's very fiscally responsible these days?
Yeah, that's when I speak to the leadership team, there's a lot of, I want to do, I need to do. I break it down into, is it aligned with the strategic profile of our business, number one? So are we meddling in something that is non-value add? So first, for me, in my order of operations of thinking, is it tied to our strategic intent? And if it is tied to the strategic intent, it's always about what are the multiple ways we can play in that space? So is it a build versus a buy? Do we need to go out and invest at a deep level now, or can we earn our way into investing over time? And I look at it. Of course, we'll look at DCF modeling and straight ROI. There are some investments, particularly in a business like ours, that we believe in getting Thorne supplements into the consumers. We're going to have to spend more on the brand level. And when you start spending upper funnel, brand investment, it becomes something a bit more difficult, to measure and to track. And so tie it to strategy, make sure you have the metrics that you can measure. Have I been successful or not? And make sure that you've evaluated more than one option when it comes to that. So I do believe in the optionality of looking at different ways to play, before you go out there to invest. And lastly, I would say it's okay to be bold. Just understand the unintended consequence of a bad decision. So what's going to happen, in a bad decision? There are decisions that may not work out, whether it's an acquisition or some investment, but don't let it ride, the whole, or don't let it determine, your business outcome. So just make sure you're holistically thinking about it.
And Lee, I just want to ask you, are you a fan of UFC?
We do partner with UFC.
That's why I asked. So,
Right. We do partner with UFC, and I was actually at one of the events, as part of the partnership this past week. So, I'm aware about it because we're invested in it. I would say before Thorne, and I'm not sure if my UFC partners would love if I said it. I've heard about it more from my kids. I'm aware about it, but quite the experience, I would say, in going to see my first UFC experience. And what I take away from UFC is the performance side of it. What we do with UFC is all around investing in the performance of the athlete. And what's really neat working with the UFC is that UFC, unlike other professional sports organizations, they really mandate to their athletes on what they can use. So it's great they're using Thorne. It was great that the winner this past weekend was all, a Thorne athlete. But great question, albeit with a little smile, Jack. And it's a UFC highly interesting.
yeah, and good for them. They, some people maybe think the worst, but they've gone years without any doping type of situations, right? So it's a very clean company, right? So
yeah, they've taken a view. They take that very, very, very seriously, and I think that's where, if you look at Thorne, and they have other great brands they work with, are really high in terms of the quality, the efficacy, and all the certifications, so they don't run into issues.
okay, cool. So I want to switch gears a little bit because I know you and your wife do some philanthropic work together, and the whole having a life outside of work, easier said than done. But tell us a little about some of those philanthropic things that you do together.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. My wife and I, if we look at family, family really important to us. And if I look at a couple of areas, that family members have, been stricken with, either in chronic illness or, disease, what we, try to do is get involved with those, charitable organizations and, lead certain things, with them. So, without necessarily naming the two, we do participate and, make sure that we can, give back. And, it's less about just, cutting the check, but it's about, how can we, help these organizations think differently about, doing things in a way that they can bring and promote the things that, they want to bring. And it does feel good. I think doing, good feels good. And, there's kind of like this full circle aspect of it. I'm not a karma guy, if you will. I do believe that you can influence your own, outcomes, but it is something that's important to, she and I.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One of the things I really hate in sports when they say, the Boston Bruins control their own destiny. No, they don't. If destiny exists, nobody can control their own. So, but yeah, I'm like you though. I'm not a karma guy. If I do good things, it's because I want to do good things. Not.
Are you wearing Boston socks for this weekend, or how does that play into it?
My dad was an original Patriots back when they were the Boston Patriots fan. They were his love, and therefore they were my love. I mean, not a lot of people know it, but they started out. They played their first games at Fenway Park. And then they played at Harvard, and my dad, he's an original season ticket holder, and my wife kind of made him, my mother kind of made him give up his tickets when the kids came along, just too much time away from home. So, but Patriots are my team, and they look like they might be on the upswing a little bit. So,
no, I think you'll have a good fall.
yeah, I hope so. I just want to get back in the Super Bowl against the Giants. It seems like the two teams just play great games against each other all the time. So, something to look forward to. But cool. But anyway, I want to chat a little about just bringing it back. I have one final question for you. And you've had a great career, and learned a lot, and I'm sure you've been a great mentor to people along the way. But what's some advice that you would like to share with our listeners who are in the sort of pre-CFO type of mode, things that they should be thinking about to have a lucrative, healthy, and impactful career?
Yeah, there's several different things that I would say. I approach it through a couple different lens. Some apertures will be a little bit wider than others, and first would be don't be afraid to take roles earlier in your career or even mid that other people don't want to take. So do things that are going to differentiate you. So differentiation, I think, is really important, and it doesn't mean act different. It means have another notch on your tool belt. So there's some people that might not want to work in a manufacturing facility because it's a manufacturing facility. Somebody who might not want to move to an area for different reasons, or get into a particular role. So do some roles that are differentiated, that are, as I said a little bit earlier, that get your stomach a little bit knotted up. And I think that really helps. The second would be, as you move forward in your career, if you are seeking to be a CFO, become the not technical expert of everything, but you need to know enough about what you need to know and have the discipline and the courage to raise your hand when you don't know something and bring it in there. So be humble in terms of how you think you approach. And the third is lean in to decisions. Like when you're passionate about something, listen, act, but lean into it. If you're and as a CFO, don't sit in the background. CFOs are not just there to say, "Hey, Lee, does this number make sense or does this number work?" Lean into strategy. And the last one would be an enterprise leader first. It's much easier said when you're later in your career, but if you think of yourself as, I am a business leader first across my business, of which I'm the CFO, or I'm a financial professional, I'm going to put context around everything I do in a way that's going to be the right thing for the business. And you will increase your credibility significantly with the rest of the business around you. You're not just looking at, I have to do a budget exercise. It's about what investment do we need to drive the business forward. And if you dial it back in, you're going to bring people around you much more quickly than you would otherwise.
I think that's great advice. And you gave 4 different pieces of advice. I think we're going to have to charge our listeners a little bit extra for this episode, Lee. So, this has been a lot of fun. And, I'm sure that the listeners are going to, get some great stuff out of it. So you got a lot going on. So I want to take a moment just to thank you for being here today. And also, I'd like to offer you the final word.
So final word where I would leave is, said it just now, lean in. Don't wait for things to come to you. Find the things that you're passionate about. Step forward, lean in, take risk. I appreciate, Jack, the time. A lot of fun with you, and nice to see you today.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.